What if the most dangerous creature in your town wasn't dangerous at all? What if the only one brave enough to see through the growls, the scars, and the silence was a child? In today's story from Hero, a blind little girl walks straight into the heart of an abandoned German shepherd so feared no one dared say his name. But what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about fear, loyalty, and healing. Stay with us till the very end, because hidden inside this quiet tale is a powerful lesson that just might change how you see the world. Would you have done what she did? It was the kind of storm that silenced everything, the kind where snow didn't fall, it consumed. Thick white sheets erased fences, buried trees, and swallowed the Vermont sky whole. People in the village of Willow Hollow were used to winter, but not like this. Not with this kind of wind, not with this kind of dread in their bones. No one noticed at first the dark figure moving through the storm. He came from the woods, not down a road or a marked path, but from behind the frozen marshlands, where the trees grew too tightly and no one went after dark. His paws hit the snow like anvils, leaving behind impressions too big to be any ordinary dog. His fur was soaked and matted, his chest heaving from exhaustion and something else, urgency. And across his back, cradled awkwardly but carefully, was a small body wrapped in a patchwork coat. It wasn't until the snow cleared enough for headlights to break through that someone screamed, "Oh God, it's him!" The cry came from Mary Calhoun, who had lived in the village all her life. She clutched her scarf to her mouth and stepped back. Others gathered, drawn by the sound, by the shape emerging from the white. "What is that?" a man whispered. "A wolf?" someone asked. "No," Mary said, voice trembling. "That's Grim." The name dropped like a stone in cold water. Grim, the beast of Willow Marsh, the dog the town had forgotten but never truly stopped fearing. He was supposed to be gone, dead maybe, disappeared into the mist years ago after what happened. Most people never spoke of it anymore. It was easier that way, easier to bury things under layers of snow and time. But there he was. Grim didn't look at anyone. He didn't growl, didn't lunge. He just walked, each step slower than the last, his breath heavy and steaming in the air. Blood marked the snow beneath him. It wasn't clear if it was his or not, maybe both. People were too stunned to move. And then they saw the child, a girl no more than 7. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks, her lips were pale from cold, and her small fingers clutched at the tufts of fur across Grim's shoulder. Somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. "Is that Mira?" someone whispered. A few villagers rushed forward now, blankets, coats, hands trembling. Edith T. Thompson pushed through the crowd, her gray hair loose from its bun, snow on her shoulders. She dropped to her knees. "Oh, my baby." She reached out just as Grim lowered himself onto the snow, gently, slowly, like setting down something fragile. Mira rolled onto the ground, still breathing, her face calm even in sleep. "Mira, can you hear me?" Edith said, cupping her granddaughter's face. The girl's eyelids fluttered. Her lips moved. A whisper, carried on steam and snow. "He came for me." It was the first word she'd spoken in months. Edith stared, stunned. The villagers around them exchanged glances. No one dared speak. No one dared move closer to the dog, who now lay panting in the snow, his amber eyes half closed, ears flat. Grim didn't look dangerous now. He looked done, as if he had used up every last ounce of strength just to get the girl back here, as if he didn't care what came next. "He saved her," someone finally said. Mary nodded slowly, voice cracked. "He brought her home." The mayor arrived moments later, bundled in an old coat, eyes wide beneath his cap. He didn't speak either, just looked at the blood, the girl. "Get the doctor," he said quietly, "and bring towels." No one said anything about Grim, not yet. It was too early for forgiveness, too late for denial. They carried Mira inside Edith's home. The doctor came, checked her pulse, her breathing. Miraculously, no frostbite, no serious wounds, just exhaustion and shock. "Someone found her," he said, amazed. "Someone carried her." No one corrected him. Outside, Grim remained where he had fallen, his chest rising and falling in labored rhythm. Snow gathered on his back, and still he did not move. "Is he dying?" a boy asked, tugging his mother's sleeve. She didn't answer. She didn't know, but Mira did. Later that night, after she'd been cleaned and warmed, wrapped in thick blankets and hot cocoa half sipped at her side, she asked for him. "I want to see Grim," she said, clear as day. They hesitated. Who would take her out there? What if he snapped? What if this had all been some kind of trick? But Mara insisted. So they brought her to the porch, bundled and blinking in the light of the porch lamp. Grim was still there. She stepped down, walked the path barefoot, against protests, and knelt beside him. He lifted his head weakly. She pressed her hand against his muzzle and whispered, "I knew you'd come." No one in the village slept soundly that night, but for the first time in years, the silence in Willow Hollow didn't feel cursed. It felt like the beginning of something being undone, something returning home. Long before that snowstorm, long before the whispers started again, there was a time when the name Grim didn't send shivers down spines. Back then, he had another name, one no one in the village of Willow Hollow had spoken aloud in years. Shadow. That was what Jack Donovan called him. Shadow because he never left his side. Jack had been a search and rescue officer for Vermont's Forest Division. In his prime, he'd led more than 100 missions with that dog. Floods, forest fires, even a few missing hikers who'd wandered too deep into the White Mountains. Shadow had a reputation, a good one. Fast, strong, and smarter than most people. They trusted each other with their lives, and they had saved lives together. But nothing builds legend like silence. And silence followed Shadow after that one terrible winter. It started with the Anderson boy. Lucas Anderson was 6 years old, curious and fast. He went missing one afternoon just after the snow began to fall. His mother said he was chasing a blue jay into the woods. That was all they knew. The town panicked. Every able-bodied man formed a line and entered the woods with flashlights and whistles. Jack was already retired by then. Shadow was older too, no longer on the roster, but still strong, still sharp. When they heard the call, Jack didn't hesitate. He and Shadow were out the door before anyone asked them to be. They searched all night. By morning, Shadow returned, alone. Blood on his chest, a ripped piece of blue fabric in his teeth. People gathered. Questions turned to accusations. Where was the boy? Why was Shadow alone? Why hadn't Jack found them together? Someone said they saw the dog dragging something near Willow Marsh. Someone else said they heard growling. It didn't take long for fear to turn into blame. They never found Lucas, and they never gave Shadow a chance to explain. Jack said nothing, not out of guilt, but out of fear. He had seen what Shadow found that night. He knew the boy had already been gone when they got there. He knew the blood wasn't Shadow's doing, but there was something worse than truth in a small town. There was shame. So Jack stepped back. Let the story shift. Let them change Shadow in the old barn on the edge of the marsh. Let them call him Grim. Let them believe Guayito. Shadow didn't resist. Not once. He stayed in that barn for 4 days. Then one night, during a thunderstorm, he vanished. Chain snapped. Door broken. Gone. From then on, the stories began. Children dared each other to get close to the marsh. Some claimed to see glowing eyes in the trees. Others said he howled like a ghost when the wind hit right. Livestock found dead, fences torn. People blamed Grim, but no one ever got close enough to prove anything, and no one really wanted to. By the second year, the village had posted wooden signs around the marsh. Keep out. Some thought it was for safety. Others knew better. It was to forget. But forgetting isn't the same as forgiving. And guilt doesn't rot. It waits. Jack Donovan aged faster than most. He spent his days carving wood and his nights staring at the edge of the marsh from his back porch. Sometimes he'd talk like Shadow was still listening. Sometimes he drank until he fell asleep in the chair they used to share. No one visited him much, and he didn't expect them to. He'd once told the mayor, years after the incident, "People don't want the truth. They want the clean version. And what I have, it ain't clean." Then came Mira, 7 years old, dark-haired, quiet. She moved into town with her grandmother, Edith, shortly after her parents died in a car accident on Highway 12. The town welcomed them with fun and awkward sympathy. People liked Edith. She was one of their own. But Mira was different, not just because she didn't speak. It was how she watched everything, like she was listening to things the rest of them couldn't hear. Jack noticed her first from his porch. She walked the edge of the marsh one afternoon, her hands full of folded paper animals. She placed them near the sign that said, "Keep out," and sat down, cross-legged, humming softly. She came back the next day, and the next. At first, Jack figured the girl was grieving. Again, kids do strange things with grief, but then one morning he saw something that stopped him cold. Footprints, not just hers, larger, heavier, too big for any kid, too deep for a coyote. He followed them, just to the edge. There, beside one of the paper cranes Mira had left, was a single paw print, clear as glass, still fresh. Jack went home that night and dug through the old drawer where he kept Shadow's collar. The leather was cracked, the tag rusted over, but the name was still there. Not Grim, Shadow. He closed the drawer and sat in the dark. And for the first time in over a decade, Jack Donovan whispered something out loud. "I know you're still out there." He didn't say it to confess. He said it because he hoped maybe someone was listening. Before the storm, before the whispers, and long before the name Grim returned to anyone's lips, there was only Mira Thompson. 7 years old, small for her age, with thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and gray eyes that seemed older than they should have been. People said she looked like her mother, but Edith Thompson, her grandmother and only guardian, saw her son in her instead. The way she tilted her head when listening, the way her fingers played with the hem of her sleeves when nervous, the way she never looked away, even when everything hurt. Mira hadn't spoken since the accident. It happened on a cold afternoon just outside Montpelier. Her parents were returning from a weekend trip, Mira asleep in the back seat, a soft toy clutched to her chest. The other driver had fallen asleep behind the wheel. No alcohol, no high-speed chase, just a mistake. A blind corner, black ice, and a second too late. Mira survived. Her parents didn't. The first days afterward, Mira cried, quietly, not wildly, not uncontrollably, just small tears that left salt stains on Edith's sweaters. Then she stopped crying. Then she stopped speaking. At first, the doctors called it selective mutism, a reaction to trauma. But as weeks became months, the silence seemed to harden into something deeper. Not refusal, not fear, just absence. Like the part of Mira that spoke had packed its things and left. Edith did everything she could. Therapy, books, music, warmth, and above all, patience. But Mira remained silent. What she did do, however, was watch. She watched the wind move the curtains. She watched birds land on the windowsill. She watched people when they thought she wasn't watching. And when words failed her, she used her hands. She drew, constantly. At first it was just circles and shapes, then animals, then houses and trees, then dreams. Edith had a shoebox full of Mira's drawings and items, each one carefully dated, each one like a window into a world she wasn't allowed into. One image showed a giant black dog curled in snow beside a small girl. Another showed a forest trail with a shadow following a paper bird. None of these things had happened. Not yet. In Willow Hollow, people were kind, quiet too. No one asked Mira to talk, no one stared too long. They'd seen enough grief in their own time to understand that healing came in strange forms. Mira spent most days walking the edge of town. Not far, just enough to stay close to the trees, close to the wind. She'd whisper sometimes, not loud enough to hear, not to anyone in particular. Just soft sounds, half hums, words that never fully formed. Edith once followed her at a distance, just to make sure she was safe, and heard her whisper into the air, as if the trees themselves were listening. "I miss their hands." That was the only full sentence she had ever heard her say since the funeral. Edith didn't bring it up. Some things were better left to drift on the breeze. One Sunday morning while sorting laundry, Edith found a note taped to the fridge, not a written note. A drawing, a paper crane folded tightly, wings flared. Inside the folds was a tiny heart drawn in red pencil. It wasn't the crane that startled her. It was the fact that she hadn't seen Mira draw it, hadn't seen her fold it. It had just appeared. Later that day, Mira walked to the outskirts of Willow Marsh, carrying a small tin lunchbox filled with more folded animals. Cranes, foxes, wolves, even a turtle. She placed them along the wooden fence that circled the marsh, the one with the faded keep-out signs nailed to it. Then she sat cross-legged in the snow and stared into the trees. Edith watched from the porch. She didn't stop her. It became a routine. Each day, Mira would fold one new animal, then walk to the fence, sit for an hour or so, then walk back. No one really noticed, except one person, Jack Donovan. He watched from his own porch, a chipped mug in his hand, firewood smoke curling around his head. He didn't say anything either. Just watch the girl who didn't speak leave gifts at the edge of a place no one dared enter. One day, as Mira placed a paper fox beside the others, she heard something behind her. Not wind, not leaves. A breath. Low, heavy, alive. She turned. At first, she saw nothing. Just trees and snow and branches caught in a gust. Then she saw the eyes. Amber. Watching. It didn't startle her. Maybe it should have. She stood. The dog was huge. Bigger than any she had seen before. Dark fur streaked with age. Scars along its shoulders and jaw. He stood at the edge of the trees, half shrouded in mist. They looked at each other. She didn't run. She didn't gasp. She simply opened her palm and whispered, "You're not scary." The dog blinked, took one step forward, then another. The wind held its breath. He stopped a few feet from her, head low, ears twitching. Not threatening, just cautious. Mira reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded crane. She knelt and placed it on the ground, then backed away, never breaking eye contact. The dog sniffed it, sat down. Mira smiled, then turned and walked home. She never told anyone what happened that day, not in words anyway, but that night she drew a new picture. A girl and a beast, sitting side by side. Above them, written in childlike handwriting, "He remembers." After that first meeting, something shifted, not just in the woods beyond Willow Hollow, but inside Mira herself. She didn't tell Edith about the dog, not because she was hiding something, but because, how do you explain a moment like that? A moment that didn't feel real but left you different afterward. Besides, Mira didn't speak much. Not yet. Her stories came in lines and color and paper. That night she drew him again. This time the dog was closer. Sitting near her folded crane, his head tilted in curiosity. Above them, she colored the sky with wide strokes of gray and blue, stormy but not frightening. And on the edge of the page, in the smallest handwriting, were two words, "Maybe tomorrow." She meant it. The next morning, Mira woke before Edith. She tiptoed around the creaking floorboards, wrapped her scarf twice, and slipped a sandwich and a paper flower into her coat pocket. As the sun rose behind a curtain of fog, she followed the familiar path toward Willow Marsh. The paper animals were still there, though some had blown over in the wind. She fixed them one by one, pressing little stones on their corners to keep them grounded. Then she sat, just like the day before, and waited. It didn't take long. From between the trees, Grim emerged. He moved slowly, not limping exactly, but careful, like someone who'd learned to be wary of being seen. His fur was rough, with tufts sticking out like he'd been sleeping in briar. His eyes, though, were sharp, not wild, not dull, but watchful, alive. They didn't move toward each other. They didn't need to. Instead, Mira reached it into her pocket and pulled out the sandwich. She unwrapped it gently and placed it on a flat rock between them. Then she scooted back, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. Grim sniffed the air. One step, two, a pause. Then he padded forward and took the sandwich, gently, not snatching, and backed away before sitting down again. He ate without looking at her, but when he finished, he lifted his eyes and met hers. Mira smiled. This became their routine. Each day after school, though Mira didn't talk in class, she would come home, fold a new paper animal, and slip out to the edge of the marsh with a snack in one pocket and a story in the other. Her stories were drawings. Sometimes she'd hold them up for Grim to see, as if explaining. Sometimes she'd leave them at the base of a tree, weighted by pebbles. Other times she'd hum a tune without words, soft melodies from memory or made up on the spot. Grim never came too close, not at first. But day by day, the space between them shrank. By the second week, he was sitting just a few feet from her, By the third, he let her touch the side of his neck. Just once, just for a second. His muscles tensed but didn't pull away. Mira's fingers were small but gentle, and Grim didn't flinch. She whispered, "You're not a monster," as her hand left his fur, and he stayed. Edith, for her part, noticed changes in Mira. She still didn't speak much, but she smiled more. She slept more soundly. She began drawing not just dogs and forests, but people, her parents, herself, a porch with teacups, a hill with a tree, things she hadn't drawn in almost a year. Edith asked her gently one evening, "You've been walking out by the marsh?" Mira nodded, silent. "Anything out there?" A pause, then Mira handed her a drawing. It showed a girl with a scarf sitting in front of a large black dog. Behind them were paper birds strung together in a line-like garland, hanging from invisible air. Edith stared at it for a long time. She didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she folded a blanket and gave it to Mira the next day, in case your friend wants something soft to lie on. That evening, Mira brought it. She laid it over the dry leaves and patted the spot gently. Grim approached, sniffed it, and lay down slowly, like he couldn't remember the last time anyone offered him comfort. Myra sat beside him, cross-legged, and started braiding small twigs and weeds into tiny crowns. She set one gently on his head. He sneezed, shook his ears, but left it there. They sat until the sun disappeared and the air turned cold. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted. Grim's ears flicked, but he didn't rise. Mira rested her head against his shoulder just for a moment. He didn't move. Back in the village, people began noticing the change too. One boy, out playing with his dog near the woods, saw a large dark shape watching from the trees. He didn't tell anyone until later, but he said it wasn't scary. He was just looking, he whispered to his mother, like he was checking we were okay. More reports followed. Pets weren't going missing anymore. No torn fences, no strange howls, just a presence. Quiet, steady, unthreatening. Whispers spread. Had the beast changed? No one dared go see, except Mira, and she never stopped. Their friendship wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real, built piece by piece in the silence. A girl who wouldn't speak, and a duo who couldn't be heard. Jack Donovan had spent most of his life knowing what silence could hide. He had been a man of orders once, a search and rescue officer, a war veteran depending on who was telling the story. Back when his back was straighter, his hands steadier, and his name carried some weight in Vermont's Forest Division. People used to come to him for answers, for solutions, for leadership, but not anymore. Now he was just the man in the crooked house at the edge of Willow Marsh. The man who talked to no one, who kept to himself, who sat for hours on his porch staring at the trees like they owed him something. He didn't blame them for forgetting. It was easier that way. No one had spoken to him about the Anderson boy in years, not directly, not in a way that acknowledged the truth behind it. They still avoided the marsh, still left offerings of fear nailed to fences and carved into stories told around fireplaces. The legend had grown legs, sharp ones, with fangs and glowing eyes. But Jack knew better, because he was the one who didn't speak when he should have. When they found Shadow standing in the snow that morning, blood on his muzzle, a piece of a blue coat clenched in his jaws, Jack knew what had happened. He knew the boy had already been gone when Shadow found him. He knew because he'd seen it with his own eyes. Too late to help, too stunned to stop what came next. But instead of standing up for his partner, his friend, his dog, Jack stayed silent. He had his reasons, none of them good. Fear, doubt, reputation, shame. He told himself that defending Shadow wouldn't bring the boy back, that it would only make things worse, that the town needed someone to blame. And in the end, he let them blame the one who couldn't speak for himself. Shadow was chained, condemned, and disappeared into the marsh not long after. Jack never looked for him, but he never stopped thinking about him either. In the years that followed, Jack aged in that lonesome kind of way that only guilt can cause. His hair went gray in a single year. His knuckles thickened with arthritis. He spoke less, drank more, and left the television on mostly for company. The news was too loud, the silence too honest. Then Mira came. He noticed her not because she was loud, she wasn't, but because she moved like someone who understood what silence could carry. She didn't bounce like most children. She floated. like her thoughts were heavier than her feet. Each day, she walked to the fence line. Each day, she left behind paper animals like offerings to the woods. Jack watched from behind his mug, a different one each morning, lined up like old soldiers on his porch railing. And then one day he saw the footprints. Not the girls, the other ones. Bigger, deeper, careful. He followed them only to the edge. He knew better than to go deeper into the marsh now. That place didn't want him. But what he found stopped him cold. A paw print, clean, fresh, familiar. He went back inside and opened the drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was Shadow's collar. The tag was faded, but the name was still there. Not Grim, Shadow. He sat with it in his lap for a long time, running his thumb over the engraving. The next day, he waited. Not for the girl, for the dog. It didn't take long. He saw the figure move through the trees, slower, heavier than before, but unmistakable, the shape, the posture, the way he paused to scan the horizon, and the way he looked toward the girl, not the house. It was him, Shadow, older, scarred, alive. Jack's throat tightened. His voice cracked when he whispered, "You came back." But Shadow didn't look at him. Just moved on, past the fence, toward Mira. That was the first time Jack truly understood something about regret. It doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly, like snow on an empty roof, quiet and constant, until one day the weight of it makes something collapse. Jack couldn't collapse yet. Not without doing something first. So he tried. He made his way into town, talked to people he hadn't spoken to in years, brought up Shadow's name, brought up what happened. Most listened politely, others shifted their weight uncomfortably, some looked down at their shoes. No one had answers. But Mira did. She showed up on his porch one afternoon with a drawing. No words, just lines. A picture of a man standing beside a dog with a storm behind them, and a little girl holding out a paper bird between them like a bridge. Jack stared at it for a long time. "She knows," he whispered. Mira didn't respond. She just placed the drawing in his lap and turned to leave. Jack reached out, not to stop her, but to give her something. He opened the drawer again and handed her the old collar. "She should have it," he said. Mira looked at it, then at him, her eyes steady and deep. Then she nodded once and walked away. That night, Jack stood on his porch and looked out at the marsh again. He knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, but maybe Shadow did. Maybe it wasn't too late, for one of them at least, and that was enough. It began with a sky too still. The air that morning was strange, thick, cold, but oddly quiet, like the world had paused to inhale. Edith noticed it first. She stood at the kitchen sink, holding her tea longer than usual, watching the gray clouds creep across the treetops like slow ghosts. Mira had been unusually restless. She hadn't drawn anything that day, hadn't folded a single paper animal. She just stared out the window, her eyes following something no one else could see. "You all right, sweetheart?" Edith asked gently. Mira blinked, then nodded. But there was something behind her eyes, something unsettled, like a storm brewing behind stained glass. By noon, the snow had begun. Not heavy at first, but relentless. The kind of snow that doesn't swirl. It falls, straight and steady, like a white curtain lowering over the world. Edith turned on the porch light, just in case, and checked that Mira's boots were near the door. But when she turned around, Mira was gone. She'd slipped out in that quiet way she always did, like mist parting from the river. No door slam, no warning, just silence. Edith's heart dropped. She searched the yard first, then the edge of the woods, calling her name over and over. Nothing. The snow was falling faster now, wind curling around the rooftops, rattling windows. Edith ran to the neighbors. Within minutes, the town mobilized. They remembered what happened last time a child disappeared in weather like this. And no one had forgotten the boy from years ago, the boy who never came back. The search spread quickly. Flashlights, shovels, radios crackling with static. Edith's voice over and over, "Mira, Mira!" But the girl was already deeper into the woods than anyone imagined. She had followed something, not a sound exactly, not a voice, more like a pull. It led her past the paper animals, past the fence line, into the marsh. The wind stung her cheeks, the snow soaking through her coat, but she didn't stop. Somewhere inside, she knew where she was going, a place she'd seen in drawings before she ever saw it in real life among the clearing near the frozen creek. She reached it just as her legs gave out, knees sinking into the snow. She tried to call for help, but no words came. Her throat burned, her lips numb. Her fingers, once so nimble, now curled into fists against the cold. She whispered the only thing she could manage. Shadow. Then she collapsed. For a long moment all was still. Then the forest moved. He came like a black streak through white, head low, paws flying, chest heaving with every breath. Grim's eyes scanned the woods like he was born of them. His coat was dusted in snow, but his movements were sharp, determined. He found her in seconds. She was curled like a paper bird that had fallen from the sky. He nudged her face gently, then whined, a high, desperate sound that didn't suit his size. He paced around her, then sat, raising his head to the sky and howled. The sound cut through the trees like a siren, low, mournful, but powerful. In town, Jack Donovan froze on his porch, the sound hitting him like an old memory cracking open. "That's him," he whispered. The searchers turned toward the sound. They moved faster now, urgency pushing through fear. Meanwhile, back at the creek, Grim had already begun to act. He lowered himself beside Mira, curling his body around her to shield her from the wind. He licked her forehead gently, over and over, as if trying to coax warmth back into her skin. Then, somehow, no one ever figured out how he lifted her. He didn't drag her. He carried her. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but enough. He crossed the snow drifts like a shadow stitched to the storm, his paws sinking deep, legs shaking, but he didn't stop. Not once. By the time the searchers reached the trail, he was already halfway back to the village. Someone saw him first from a window, a dark figure pushing through the snow with something cradled against his shoulders. Then the yelling started. "They're here! It's the girl! No, it's the dog! It's Grim!" People rushed outside, blankets in hand, unsure whether to help or just watch. But no one moved fast enough. Grim reached the center of the square and gently laid Mira down in the snow, then stepped back. He didn't growl. He didn't run. He just stood there. His sides heaved. Blood ran down his front leg. "Yeah, I am 18 and I think the result of a gash that no one saw until much later. Edith dropped to her knees, sobbing, gathering Mira into her arms. She was alive. Cold, weak, but alive. "She's breathing," someone shouted. The crowd exhaled as one. And Grim, he simply sat, chest rising and falling in slow, ragged rhythm, his gaze locked on Mira. He made no sound. He didn't move when the doctor arrived, didn't flinch when the boy brought the towels, or when Edith leaned over to stroke Mira's hair. Then Mira opened her eyes. She saw the people. She saw her grandmother. And then she saw him. She lifted one hand, weak, trembling, and reached toward the dog. "He came back," she whispered. The crowd fell silent, not out of shock, but out of awe, because in that moment, they saw not a beast, not a curse, but a promise kept. And for the first time in many years, no one looked away. Not from him, not anymore. The storm passed by morning. Not just the one in the sky, but the one in the town's memory. A silence hung over Willow Hollow, but it was no longer the cold, suspicious kind. It was quieter, gentler, like the moment after a song ends and no one wants to be the first to speak. Inside Edith's home, Mira lay wrapped in layers of wool blankets, her cheeks flushed pink again, her fingers twitching back to life. The doctor had said it was a miracle. A few more hours out there and she might not have made it. Edith had only nodded. She didn't need a medical explanation. She had seen the miracle for herself. Grim lay just outside the porch, his wound clean but still tender, a bandage wrapped tight around his front leg. He hadn't moved much since bringing Mira home. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. He just kept watch, head up, ears forward, only resting when he knew she was breathing. And she was. Later that afternoon, a few townspeople gathered. Not by plan, not by invitation. They just came, one by one, to the front of Edith's small house on Pine Hollow Road. Some brought food, Some brought warm towels. Others just stood there, unsure what to say, eyes flicking between the girl in the window and the dog on the porch. Jack Donovan arrived last, his cane thumping softly on the porch step. He looked older than the day before. Not in body, his back was still tall, his boots still sturdy, but in the way his eyes moved, like someone finally ready to look directly at something they had been avoiding for too long. Mira saw him from the window and sat up slowly. Edith turned, surprised. "Are you feeling strong enough?" Mira didn't answer. She just pointed to the drawer beside the table. Edith opened it and found the drawing, creased and faded at the corners, but still intact. A man, a dog, a child between them holding out a paper bird like a bridge between two islands. Edith held it with both hands, her throat tightening. "You want to give this to him?" Mira nodded once. She stood slowly, carefully, and wrapped herself in a blanket before stepping onto the porch. The people parted to let her through. Not a word was spoken. Mira walked up to Jack and placed the drawing in his hand. He looked at it a long time, then at her, then at Grim. The old dog blinked once, then shifted his gaze to the horizon. Jack cleared his throat. "You remember this?" he asked quietly, not to the girl, not even really to the dog, but to the world, maybe, to the memory hanging between them. Mira didn't speak. She didn't need to. Jack turned to the small crowd. There were maybe 20 people now, some neighbors, some old friends, some who had never dared to say his name aloud since the day Shadow disappeared. He raised the drawing and for the first time in years began to speak without shame. "I knew this dog," he said. "Before you called him Grim, before the signs, before the stories, his name was Shadow." A few murmurs. Jack continued. "He saved my life more than once. Saved others too. You used to trust him. We all did." He paused. "And when that boy disappeared, Lucas Anderson, I let you believe the worst. Because I didn't want to say I got there too late, that I couldn't save him, that I couldn't save anyone. And so I said nothing, and let you all bury Shadow instead." No one interrupted. A woman in the back dabbed her eyes with a glove. "I was wrong," Jack said simply, and he came back anyway. He stepped forward, slowly, and knelt beside Grim, wincing from his stiff knees. The dog didn't growl, didn't move, just looked at him. Jack reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out, an old, weathered collar. The tag barely legible, but the letters were still there if you squinted. SHADOW. "I kept this," he said, voice cracking. "I should have given it back years ago." He placed it gently beside the dog's paw, and for a moment, everything was still again. Then someone in the crowd began to clap, just once, then again. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Soon others joined in, not applause like a show, not performance, but recognition, the kind you give to someone who carried weight no one else could. Edith stepped forward, resting a hand on Jack's shoulder. "We all lost something that winter," she said, "but we don't have to carry it the same way." That night, the town removed the Keep Out signs from Willow Marsh. Volunteers went out to collect the torn paper animals, now wet from snow and time, and brought them home to Dreamwam. They hung them across the school's front windows like a banner. White cranes, wolves, foxes, folded from drawings and old letters. And inside the school, they built a shelf in the hallway beside the library. On it sat a photograph of Mira, Grim, and Jack. Below it, a plaque. "Sometimes the one you fear the most is the one who comes back for you." Winter loosened its grip slowly that year. Snow gave way to slush. Slush turned to mud. And then, almost overnight, the buds came. First the maples, then the crab apples along Main Street, and finally the tall birch trees that lined the road near Willow Marsh. By early April, the town felt like it was exhaling for the first time in months. So did Edith. She watched from her porch as Mira sat beside the old dog in the sunlight. Grim lay stretched out in the grass, his fur peppered with silver and patches of thinness, but his body at ease for once. He had put on weight since the storm, thanks to Edith's home-cooked meals, chicken, rice, scrambled eggs, things a dog could only dream of during hard years in the wild. More than the food, though, Grim stayed because of Mira. The bond between them had become something sacred. Unspoken, yes, but constant. Each morning, Mira would step outside with Barney a folded paper animal and set it at the base of the porch stairs, then sit cross-legged beside Grim and read. She didn't need to read aloud. He listened anyway. Every day, students from the town's small elementary school would pass by during recess, watching from behind the fence. Some waved, some whispered. Eventually, they started walking over. Carefully at first, one at a time. Mira welcomed them with a nod, handing them folded foxes and cranes as gifts. And if they were patient, they could sit and pet the great black dog with the watchful eyes. Not one child was ever harmed. In fact, the first time a kindergartner fell and scraped her knee beside him, Grim lifted his head, sniffed her face gently, then lowered it again as if saying, "You're fine, little one." The teachers called it a phenomenon. The principal called it therapy. But Myra just called it home. That summer, the school board approved a plan to build a small, covered structure beside the garden, just off the playground. A quiet place, with benches and shade. A place where children could go when they needed calm. Where no one expected them to talk, perform, or explain. They called it Whisper Home. And at the center of it, carved into the wood by Jack Donovan himself, was a tribute plaque. For the ones who hear what others miss, for the ones who stay when no one else does. Grim spent most afternoons there now, lying beneath the bench, his breathing slow, rhythmic, his ears twitching whenever Mira walked near. He was aging, that much was clear. His movements had slowed. His naps grew longer. But he was never far from Mira. Not once. Some days she would draw pictures of their early moments. Grim beneath the trees, the first sandwich on the flat rock, the paper animals drifting across the marsh. Other days she would sit with Jack Donovan, who had taken to visiting them more often. He'd bring his harmonica, soft and rusty, and play a few tunes while Mira folded shapes and Grim snoozed with his chin on her foot. Jack spoke more these days. Not much, but enough. Enough to ask forgiveness. Enough to say thank you. One morning in early fall, when the wind had that crisp edge signaling change, Mira woke before sunrise. She wrapped herself in her softest sweater, tucked a note into her coat pocket, and walked to Whisper Home alone. The sky was a wash of violet and gold. The air was cool but still. Grim was lying in his usual spot. She knew before she touched him. He looked peaceful, eyes closed, legs curled, as if dreaming of running through leaves and light. His head rested on one of her paper cranes, the white edges bent slightly from his breath. Mira didn't cry. Not yet. She knelt beside him, placed her hand on his fur, and leaned in until her forehead touched his. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she unfolded the note from her pocket. It was one final drawing, her and Grim beneath the birch trees, side by side, a paper bird between them. This one was different, though. Behind them a shadow, tall, wide, soft, loomed like a pair of wings. She placed it beneath his paw and sat beside him until the sun climbed fully over the horizon. Word spread gently. By noon, the entire town had heard. Children brought flowers. Adults brought silence. Jack came with a small cedar box, handmade and smoothed with oil. Together, he and Mira laid Grim to rest beneath the birch tree just outside Whisper Home. The children painted stones with paw prints and hearts and placed them in a circle around the spot. No ceremony, no speeches, just presence, just love. In the days that followed, Mira still came to the bench each afternoon. Sometimes she folded animals. Sometimes she just sat. People joined her occasionally, but they never spoke unless she did. She didn't need to fill the air. She had already said everything that mattered. And one day a new family moved into the village. A small boy, nervous and quiet, was brought to school by his mother. He didn't talk much, didn't play with the other kids. But when he wandered over to the garden, he saw the bench, the stones, the folded animals, and a girl sitting alone. She looked at him, smiled, and offered him a paper wolf. He sat down beside her. He didn't speak. She didn't ask him to. They just sat, shoulders almost touching. Because sometimes home isn't a place where people shout welcome. It's a place where even your silence is heard. Sometimes the most powerful healing begins in silence, with a child's hand, a dog's sigh, and a second chance no one believed in. This story isn't about magic. It's about presence, about choosing to stay when it's easier to walk away. As the old saying goes, The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places. Ernest Hemingway. If this story touched something in you, let us know in the comments. Your words are what keep Hero Paw alive. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories that carry warmth, meaning, and hope. Because sometimes we all need a reminder. Love doesn't always bark. Sometimes it simply stays.